We're going to dive into something pretty heavy today.
Yeah,
A tough one.
definitely.
It's the case of Heather Baynard.
Okay.
She was 14 years old,
Wow.
passed away in Spartanburg, South Carolina, April 2022.
Okay.
And what makes this so disturbing is that her death wasn't an accident or an illness.
Right.
It was neglect.
Oh, wow.
And it was so severe that it led to murder charges for her parents and even her brother.
So to even get to the point of murder charges stemming from neglect,
Right.
that has to be pretty extreme. So what exactly does neglect mean legally?
Yeah, that's a great place to start because it's different from abuse.
Right.
You know, abuse we think of as an action.
Yeah.
Neglect is inaction.
Gotcha. So it's a failure to provide
Exactly.
basic needs.
Basic needs, yeah. Physical, emotional, or medical.
Okay.
And this is where it gets really tough in this case because authorities arrived at the home and it was just a horrific scene.
Wow.
Overrun with urine and feces.
Oh my gosh.
The house was filthy.
Yeah.
And the most shocking thing, I think, to most people, there were over 40 animals living inside.
Oh my gosh. So both cats and dogs.
Both cats and dogs.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think from like a child development perspective, being in that environment.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about probably, beyond just physical discomfort. I mean, probably developmental delays,
Absolutely.
emotional trauma, and just like a profound sense of isolation.
Yeah, it's just heartbreaking. And, Dennis Fowler, the coroner, called it the absolute worst case of child neglect he'd ever seen.
Wow. In his whole career.
Yeah, and I read accounts of a lot of really tragic cases,
Sure.
but this one really stuck with me.
Yeah.
And I wonder what it was about this case that made it stand out.
Yeah. I mean, was it just the length of time? I mean, was it that there were family members involved? I mean, what was it about this particular case, do you think?
Yeah, what are some of the things that stand out to experts in a case like this?
Well, I mean, you hit on a couple of them right there. I mean, the sheer duration of this. I mean, this probably went on for years.
Right.
So that's incredibly disturbing. I think the other thing, too, is it's not just, that the conditions were so bad, but it's that it points to, like, a systemic failure within the whole family unit. Like, how do the needs of this child get so consistently disregarded?
Right. And to that point, it's her brother.
Yeah.
Who is implicated. So that brings in, like, another layer of this. What was the family dynamic like? What was going on?
I mean, was it a gradual descent into this kind of, situation? I mean,
Yep.
what happened?
And how did the brother get involved?
Right, yeah.
To the point where he's actually being charged.
I mean, you almost wonder if they, like, normalized it over time, and became desensitized to just how bad it was.
Yeah.
And the brother, participating in that, it almost suggests a kind of warped, like, sense of responsibility within that family unit.
Well, the consequences in this case were severe. Heather's parents, David and Bobbi Jo Baynard, they each got life sentences for murder, plus 30 years for the child abuse and neglect charges.
Wow.
So that's really significant.
That is.
And the fact that it was a murder charge.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me like that must be very difficult to prove legally.
Right.
I mean, you really have to demonstrate that there's a direct link between the caregiver's actions, or in this case, inaction,
Right.
and the child's death.
Right.
So the prosecution must have had some pretty compelling evidence
Right.
to convince a jury of that.
And then on top of that, her brother Edward, who was 21 at the time, he was sentenced to 30 years for his role.
Oh, wow.
So that, I think, really highlights this idea that it's often a family problem.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not just the parents. Sometimes it is other people in the home who are contributing to this harmful environment.
It's crucial, I think, in these cases to look at the roles and responsibilities of everyone in the household. I mean, obviously, the parents bear the primary responsibility, but any other adults in the home, they also have a legal and a moral obligation to protect that child.
Absolutely.
And I think Edward's sentence really highlights that. It underscores the accountability.
Yeah, and I think that's where things get really tough, right? Because, we see this tragic outcome.
Right.
But how do you rewind and see those warning signs?
Yeah.
It makes you think about the role of social services.
For sure.
Schools, neighbors.
Right.
Like the entire community's role in recognizing and reporting neglect.
Yeah. I mean, prevention is definitely key, but it requires a collective effort. And I think the sad reality is that cases like this, they often slip through the cracks.
They do.
A neighbor might notice something but not want to get involved.
All right.
Or a school might see behavioral changes.
Right.
But they just don't have the resources or the training to really investigate further.
So what can we do? What can we as individuals, as communities, do to be more aware and take action before it's too late?
Well, I think we need to foster a culture of vigilance, and I think that starts with education.
Okay.
We need to educate ourselves on what the signs of neglect actually are,
Hmm.
because sometimes they can be subtle,
Yeah, absolutely.
So like pay attention to kids who seem withdrawn or who have unexplained injuries or who consistently lack, basic necessities
Right.
like food, clothing, hygiene. If you see something that concerns you, don't hesitate to report it
Right.
to the authorities. And remember, you're not accusing anyone.
Right.
You're just flagging a potential problem that needs professional assessment.
That's such a good point. Yeah, you're just raising a flag.
Exactly.
You're not, pointing fingers or making judgments. You're just saying, hey, this seems off.
Right.
Can somebody check this out?
Exactly.
Well, this has been a really heavy deep dive.
Yeah.
And I think it leaves us all with a lot to think about.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of neglect.
Yeah.
And it's an urgent call to action for all of us to protect vulnerable children.
Absolutely. We all have a role to play in safeguarding the well-being of children in our communities.
Yeah.
So let's commit to being more aware, more informed, and more proactive. It could literally save a life.
It could. It absolutely could.